Hi everyone, welcome to my presentation. My name is Jo Lord. I'm a doctoral student researcher at the University of West London. Today's presentation is Redefining the Spatial Stage, Restaging the Voice. As I will be doing some binaural demonstrations, I request that you wear some headphones so that you can experience the full effect of the production. Okay, let's get started. This presentation is titled Redefining the Spatial Stage, Restaging the Voice. It's taken from the larger PhD research paper, The Phenomenal Rise of Periphonic Record Production. And this specific presentation investigates the musicology and musicality of periphonic record production from an action-based phenomenological viewpoint. The research is focused upon the applied development of contemporary production technique through creative practice and concurrently establishes a language for 3D music production techniques. The study collates and assesses periphonic sound staging technique, outlining particular consideration when interpreting a musical concept sonic schema for a periphonic binaural 3D audio arrangement. In this particular presentation, I will specifically discuss metaphor as a vehicle for enhancing the immersive musical experience and creative production practice. Hyper-surreal metaphorical interpretation is afforded through non-front orientated periphonic staging and is developed through an ecological approach to music perception, predominantly with a focus on embodiment and proxemics. I'll evidence through case study ways in which periphony may enhance the musical staging beyond that which current industry record production practice affords, and I'll introduce concepts such as omni-monophonic and polyperiphonic vocal staging. The creative research informs the craft by defining new periphonic approaches through a non-traditional, democratic and unique approach to spatial music production. Despite the achievements of researchers, the audio industry has never been able to make a viable business in multi-channel sound. Except for cinema applications, two-channel stereo continues to be the medium of choice for the delivery of recorded music, according to Torek. The lack of spatial audio assimilation within record production is due to perceptually and technologically limited creative practice, format wars and the difficulties in consumption. It could be said that even the most creative recording producers were never fully able to exploit the surround medium, locking themselves into a rigid four-corner reproduction and a front-reliant soundstage. Though the technology and delivery methods have evolved, the creative limitations concerning practice remain the same today. With integration of periphony, captured or artificial heightened surround, there is a requisite change in the way we actively listen to recorded audio, and this change subsequently facilitates new approaches to sound staging and record production. Given the widespread popularity of personal headphone listening, and with the democratization of spatial audio technologies, there has never been a better time to explore new ways of composing records and utilizing space within production. The binaural synthesis decoding provides a more natural way of listening, whilst paradoxically the periphony can afford increased creative agency in creating unnatural, highly immersive musical scenes. Ultimately, headphone-based consumption democratically resolves the format and delivery issues often associated with spatial audio, and this study aims to present resolution for the creative limitation in approach. This presentation explores how those additional dimensions afforded through a periphonic soundstage can be exploited using proxemics, sonic embodiment and metaphor as vehicles to enhance the presentation and expression of the musical concepts presented through the staging. In a contemporary music production context, sound staging can be defined as the organisation of sound sources within the boundaries outlining a schematicized perceived performance environment. By exploring periphonic approaches to music production, we think beyond the confines of the stereo soundbox and the front-projecting triangular sound field that we are now so conditioned to, as defined by Dockeray and Moore. So how do we structure a periphonic soundstage? Well, there are some key considerations in determining the creative agency pertaining to periphonic record production. Sonic context and sonic content are inextricably linked. Sonic context determines creativity. In his book, How Music Works, David Byrne put forward that it is the context behind the composition and the adaptations to new technologies that subsequently determine the output of creativity. In the case of this study, the same can be argued. Creative agency is reliant on not just the technology used, but also the context of the musical production being worked on, whether it be performance music or production music contexts governing a hyperreal or surrealist approach. The proper holistic utilisation of the periphonic sound field as governed by a non-fronted approach presents new opportunities in creative production that could not have been achieved through traditional front-orientated approaches as employed in stereo and surround sound productions. The sonic context of the production plays an important role in informing the creative practice and the level to which the periphonic sound field can be utilised. This context of performance versus production music narrows down creative approach through the contextual requirements pertaining to the sonic content and schema. Fundamentally, the requisite differences between the two approaches can be defined as performance music representing a capture and reproduction of a performance in a given space and time, an attempt to clarify the blurred lines that exist between the collaborative activities of creation, staging, and performance. Paul Novotny defines that the undertaking of performance music often involves minimal technological intervention and often does not involve virtual staging, whereas production music allows for the creative interpretation of a theoretical performance in imagined spaces, often undertaken through technological means such as performance overdubbing, hyperreal microphone placement, MIDI and synthesizers, editing and processing, click tracks or prepared loops resulting in exaggerated sound and virtual soundscape. Moylan articulates the relationship between staging and performance across various texts. The sonic content of these productions intrinsically has a space imprinted within them, and so too an environment. The nature of live performance capture also presents a staging relationship within that environment, thereby limiting the available variation in their placements due to their relationships with one another. So both sonic context and sonic content play important roles in defining the spatial production. By utilising the lyrical, melodic and temporal content as a production narrative, the musical and lyrical content can be reinforced within the spatial production staging and vice versa. The melodic and temporal techniques are featured and continually developed across several spatial productions and presented both through instrument and vocal staging arrangements. The lyrical production technique can be demonstrated to good effect throughout Hidden Behind Static's Far From Here, which we will demonstrate later on. Research states that vertical perception is governed by spectral cues pertaining to higher frequency bands. The pitch height effect is a great example whereby the higher the frequency, the higher perceived height relative to a single source loudspeaker. Cheng and Wakefield also reinforced this relationship, quoting, "Frequencies near 6 to 8 kHz are thought to be important for elevation decoding. Therefore, it seemed a logical approach to consider sound sources with higher frequency content as being particularly suited for a periphonic height placement, and therefore counter-defining sources with a more lower frequency content as being best placed in the lower layers of periphony or presented in mono or stereo." Having defined some differences in approach based on the sonic context and sonic content, there follows two further categories informing production approach to non-front-orientated periphonic sound staging. These staging categories are presented as unfocused and focused stages. Unfocused staging can be defined as the holistic sound stage having no particular fixed focal position, though the mini-stages that make up the holistic stage may be of a fixed focus, or the point of focus may shift across different areas. A focus stage can be defined as having a main focal point situated within a given area. To example each of these, we could say that a stereo or traditional surround sound production has a typically front-focused stage, whereas Hidden Behind Static's Far From Here presents a holistically unfocused stage throughout, with a change in the focal area being dependent upon the spectral morphology of the composition and the lyrical narrative. Spectral morphology, as defined by Smalley, refers to the interactions of the spectro, the sound spectra, the elemental sonic characteristics, and its morphology, the ways in which they are shaped and changed throughout time. One of the most effective areas of production practice explores possible periphonic vocal staging techniques. The focus on spatialized vocal work is due to several factors, the first being that the voice is naturally easier for human beings to localize as we are physiologically attuned to it. It has a familiar and recognizable sonic quality and a higher frequency range useful to elevation perception. Secondly, in popular music production, the voice is generally the main focus of any stage, and so this makes vocal work a key point of interest, thus presenting the voice as a particularly suitable candidate for staging experimentation. Due to our familiarity with vocal placement most often being up front centre in the stereo sound field, this presents an expectation due to a lifetime of stereo listening that the vocal should be front centre. Therefore, the voice requires careful consideration when placing within a non-front orientated periphonic soundstage. A concern of a non-fronted lead vocal is that the mix would sound unbalanced, unusual, or incoherent if the vocal was placed off to one side, or less defined and impactful if placed to the rear of the listener. When looking at a periphonic binaural sound field, the entire production is a phantom image that the user sits centrally within, as opposed to the stereo phantom image that is projected in front of the listener. This paradoxically presented creative opportunity in terms of staging practice, whilst also at the same time proposed the problem of where to situate the lead vocal. The case studies presented in this presentation investigate the theory that the localization and balance issue pertaining to non-fronted vocal staging could be rectified if the vocal cannot be localized as being in any one particular place, but as perceiving to emanate from everywhere, thus appearing as if the listener was inside the voice. Hidden Behind Static's monomorphic seeks to address the aforementioned issue of vocal placement through implementing an omnimonophonic aesthetic to the vocal stage. Omnimonophonic is a term coined through the research practice as a means to describe the phenomenon of the voice being perceived as one voice from everywhere. It can be considered as synonymous to omnipresent, but made specifically relative to audio perception and record production. The etymology can be broken down as omni meaning in all places, mono meaning one, and phonic meaning voices or sounds. The concept behind the monomorphic omnimonophonic vocal tree was to experiment with creating an immersive listener-centric vocal stage using an ecologic approach in the construction of a choral sonic cartoon. The harmonic grouping of a voice with a closely similar timbre was theorized as a possible means to meld the voices into one singular omnimonophonic voice or singularly perceived ensemble. The choral structure was considered given the sonic context and sonic content of the vocal, suggesting such an interpretation. The vocal staging was defined based on phrase-matched pairs of a single voice, vertically positioned reflecting pitch height and utilising the spectral morphology of the melodic contour as a means to create upward movement and exaggerated height. Using a single voice recording was a means for attaining a user-centralised phantom image of the combined vocals in harmony, reinforcing the perception of one voice ensemble. The multi-singular voices, all being from the same vocalist, present as having an almost identical timbre. This is incredibly beneficial when the voices sing in both unison and in singular layers. When singing in single pairs, the wide pairing acts to create and extend the stereo image, and the similar timbre creates unison and harmony between the voices, allowing the listener to perceive the layered pairings as each being one voice. The opposed pairing and group positioning in this fashion also provides vocal coverage around all areas of the listener's head, and this was deemed an important consideration for an encompassing and immersive binaural experience. Technique was defined by matching vocal register to the height position. For example, lowest register positioned lowest, middle register positioned centrally, and the highest register positioned at the top. The voices were also grouped on the XY plane in relation to the phrasing in order to create a call and repeat responsive scenario and a wide stereo image through the spaced pairing. So vocal 1 and vocal 3 right here are the lower layer vocals. Now these are positioned, as you can see, just to the right and also just to the left of the listener, nice and close, to kind of give that enhanced feeling of intimacy. We'll listen to them just on their own, and then we will bring in the next layer. So vocals 2 and vocals 4 are actually positioned front top and rear top of the listener. And again, this creates like two sets of staggered wide pairs. So you've got a lower pair singing in a lower register. You've got the slightly higher pair front and back singing in a higher register. And it's creating coverage and a tree shape. And then you have one single voice positioned right above the listener's head, nice and high. And this is the highest pitch yet, or the highest register of the vocal. And what this does is utilises this phenomena called pitch height effect and the shape of the melodic contour to reinforce the perceived height and the movement created by the vocals within the piece. So let's just have a listen to these. I'll bring them in one by one. So we've got the lower left vocal. Lower right. Front. Rear. Top. The top's not come in yet, but you'll see. This is the one above the head. This is the one, this is front and rear. And then we've heard left and right already. Hidden Pine Statics, Far From Here, is a polyperiphonic vocal staging and depth study. It's a variation on the previous meme, utilising periphonic placement to reinforce the lyrical narrative. Proxemic theory was exploited through the use of binaural synthesis in exploring the possibilities pertaining to perceived depth and intimacy in the staging. The piece also uses a combination of externalization and internalization phenomena achieved through combining stereo and periphonic sound fields to imply a space existing outside of another space. Lyrical production cues informed the development of the vocal stage and determined the depth and intimacy experimentation in the vocal staging for this piece. However, the topography of the vocal stage remains focused on utilising the pitch-height phenomena as a means for defining the tonal structure of the voices, with the exception of the spoken male voice, which was positioned high front centre as a constant lyrical reinforcement. Okay, so here we are in my Far From Here project. Interestingly, this is the time cue. They phase between each other, these synth pads, and they're left in stereo, kind of panned left and right, and so it's quite interesting that when you mix that with the binaural, the spatialized sound field, you get this sense of internal versus externalization happening with the headphones. It really presents movement in the piece. I wish I had time to show you some more, but I've linked you my Periphonic playlist, and you're more than welcome to ask me questions. So, to conclude, the techniques constructed within the scope of this project address key issues pertaining to periphonic record production sound staging and offer a new solution through a contemporary approach to music production. This can be seen more specifically through the design and implementation of the vocal staging practice created within this project, as well as through the philosophical, theoretical and practical implementation of staging constructs throughout the associated practical work. The omnimonophonic staging technique helps to resolve the placement and perceptual issues pertaining to a non-front orientated vocal stage within a recorded periphonic sound field. This technique addresses the issue of constructing non-frontal placement without compromising balance or the listener's experience, offering an enhancement to the musical production that cannot be achieved through traditional stereo or surround sound practice. The development of this technique alone holds weight in informing and opening pathways for further development and creative research within the field. The staging constructs synthesised within this project contribute to spatial staging research and inform a new means for linguistic and cultural communication through a musical medium. The consideration of proxemics as a production theory provides a means to determine expression and motivity through approaches to depth and intimacy staging, whereas embodiment theory, though well researched in relation to music cognition, offers another means and approach to constructing spatial staging conventions, specifically those that pertain to movement, rhythm, melodic contour and height. An ecological approach to staging construct works with embodiment theories in the metaphorical construction, reinforcement and interpretation of sonic metaphor and cartoons within musical stages, and how these may be used as vehicles of expression and carriers of cultural message. So, just to summarise, the key issues pertaining to the vocal staging presented were frontal-centric expectation. This can be resolved in practice through reconditioning an alternative expectation by focusing on the creation of non-front orientated staging concepts. Balance. This can be resolved in practice through resolving offset positioning points using wide opposed pairs and quadrants. Texture. Well, layers can be spread or layered at single points. Definition and intelligibility can both be resolved in practice through careful binaural frequency mapping, i.e. if you want a present voice, don't put it behind you. Intelligibility can be managed through having a constant intelligibility line, as seen with the male voice in Far From Here, and can also be resolved through judicious panning. Perceptual contrast can be achieved through unfocused stages, movement, depth, and inter-externalization. One of the most interesting future applications of the vocal staging techniques herein is that of their application to live spatial audio. 3D audio for live performance production remains a relatively contentious area of little research. There are a number of 3D audio sound systems and processors available for the live performance market. However, there are a number of problems pertaining to multimodal perception that arise when conceptualizing a periphonic live soundstage. The most contentious being, how do you stage the instruments periphonically when there's a clear visual stage informing the audience perception? This conflict of perception causes a perceptual decorrelation that may detract from the immersion and ultimately the enjoyment of the performance, exposing the stimulus structure. It's possible that through the implementation of the omnimonophonic vocal tree and the subsequent redevelopment thereof, this project suggests a solution. There may be less perceptual discrepancy if the omnimonophonic technique could be implemented in a live sound scenario. Looking to the future, this project proposes that the omnimonophonic vocal technique is a means to resolve vocal staging issues, as a continuation in the creative research development of periphonic staging phenomena as applied to both record production and live sound applications. Please find my playlist on the link below. Thank you very much for your time, and to iAspam for having me present today. Please join me now for a live Q&A.